The redwoods rise quietly in Northern California. Some of them are older than the United States itself. Their trunks are massive. Their canopies block out the sky. And for most of the year, this forest is silent. But for 2 weeks every summer, the silence breaks. Men arrive, some of the most powerful figures in the world. Presidents, CEOs, military leaders, media executives. They enter through guarded gates. Beyond cameras, beyond reporters, beyond the public. What happens here is not broadcast, not recorded, not discussed. This place is called Bohemian Grove. For over a century, Bohemian Grove has hosted an invitation-only gathering of elite men, hidden deep within 2,700 acres of redwood forest in Sonoma County, California. There are no press passes, no official transcripts, no public agenda. Attendees agree to a strict rule. What happens at the Grove stays at the Grove. Yet over the decades, fragments have escaped. Descriptions of strange ceremonies, recordings made in secret, and accounts from journalists who managed to get closer than anyone was supposed to. The result is a rare collision of documented secrecy and public suspicion. The existence of private retreats for wealthy and influential people is not unusual, but Bohemian Grove is different. This is not a resort, not a conference, not a business summit. There are no formal speeches, no press releases, no recorded votes, and yet those who attend have shaped wars, economies, elections, and global policy. Former U.S. presidents, Republicans and Democrats alike have been confirmed as attendees through biographies, memoirs, and press investigations. The question is not whether powerful people gather here. The question is why they choose to do it in total secrecy. In democratic societies, power is expected to operate in the open. Debates are supposed to be public. Decisions are meant to be accountable. Bohemian Grove challenges that expectation. Critics argue that any private meeting of elites, especially political leaders and corporate executives, raises legitimate concerns about transparency. Defenders insist the Grove is nothing more than a social retreat, a place for music, art, drinking, and conversation, free from the pressures of office and public life. Both claims exist side by side, and both are grounded in real, documented reporting. For more than 100 years, Bohemian Grove has resisted explanation. It has been described as a harmless tradition, a networking hub, a cultural relic of old-world elites, and, by critics, a symbol of unaccountable power. What is certain is this: very few people are allowed inside, and even fewer are willing to speak openly about what they see. So what actually happens in the redwoods? Where did this tradition come from? And why, in an age of constant surveillance and digital exposure, does Bohemian Grove still manage to remain largely hidden? To answer those questions, we have to go back, not to conspiracy, but to history. Origins and early history. The story of Bohemian Grove does not begin with power. It begins with artists. In the aftermath of the California gold rush, San Francisco was transforming rapidly, wealth flooding in, fortunes made overnight, and a new elite forming almost as quickly as the city itself. Alongside financiers and industrialists, another group emerged: writers, journalists, poets, illustrators, and musicians. They referred to themselves as Bohemians, a term borrowed from European artistic circles, signifying a rejection of rigid social convention and an embrace of creativity, camaraderie, and cultural life. In 1872, a group of these men formed what would become known as the Bohemian Club of San Francisco. Early members included newspaper editors, war correspondents, playwrights, and artists affiliated with publications such as the San Francisco Chronicle and the San Francisco Examiner. According to club records and early press coverage, the stated purpose was simple: fellowship among men devoted to literature and the arts. The club's motto, recorded in its early documents, was "Weaving spiders come not here," a line adapted from Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. The meaning was explicit. This was meant to be a space free from business deals, political maneuvering, and commercial ambition, at least in theory. By the late 19th century, the Bohemian Club had become a prominent cultural institution in San Francisco. Its gatherings featured poetry readings, theatrical performances, musical compositions, and elaborate dinners. Members staged original plays and operas, many of which were preserved in club archives and referenced in historical studies of West Coast arts culture. But as the city grew wealthier, so did the club's membership. Industrialists, railroad magnates, bankers, and lawyers began to join, not because the club abandoned its artistic roots, but because cultural prestige itself had become a marker of elite status. As historian Kevin Starr later noted in his writing on California's ruling class, power on the West Coast often presented itself through patronage of the arts, rather than overt displays of authority. By the 1890s, the Bohemian Club faced a problem. Its urban headquarters in San Francisco, documented in contemporary newspapers, had become crowded and noisy. Members wanted a place away from the city, somewhere secluded, somewhere natural, somewhere private. In 1899, the club acquired a remote tract of land along the Russian River in Sonoma County. Towering redwoods dominated the landscape. The trees were ancient, the terrain rugged, and access limited. Early club correspondents described the area as cathedral-like, a place that inspired reverence and quiet. This land would become Bohemian Grove from the beginning. The grove was conceived as a seasonal retreat rather than a permanent settlement. Members would leave behind their titles and offices, at least symbolically, and immerse themselves in nature, art, and ritualized leisure. Camp structures were built, named after literary figures and historical references. Alcohol flowed freely. Performances were staged beneath the trees. One early club leader, poet George Sterling, frequently cited in literary histories of the period, described the grove as a place where men shed the armor of daily life. Yet even in its earliest years, contradictions were visible. The club insisted it was not political, but its membership increasingly included men who shaped railroads, banks, courts, and governments. The club insisted business was forbidden. Yet friendships formed there would later appear again in corporate boards, cabinet appointments, and policy discussions, documented not through Grove records, but through biographies and public archives. What had begun as an artist's escape was quietly becoming something else, a shared private space for men who controlled both culture and capital. Importantly, none of this was hidden at the time. Newspapers in the early 1900s openly reported on Bohemian Club outings. Society pages listed attendees. The secrecy came later. At the turn of the 20th century, elite male retreats were not unusual in America. Institutions like Skull and Bones at Yale, private hunting lodges, and gentlemen's clubs in New York and London operated under similar principles. They were homosocial spaces, shaped by the belief, widely accepted at the time, that leadership and governance were best cultivated among men of shared status, away from public scrutiny. Bohemian Grove fit neatly into this tradition. What made it different was scale, longevity, and location. A vast forest, a recurring annual ritual, and a membership that would soon include presidents of the United States. By the early 20th century, Bohemian Grove was no longer just a cultural retreat. It had become a tradition, one that blended art, mythology, hierarchy, and exclusion. And as the Grove grew more influential, it also grew more private. The rules hardened, access tightened, and silence became part of the culture. The foundation had been laid, not for a conspiracy, but for something far more enduring. An institution built on discretion, and it is within that discretion that the rituals would begin. Rituals, ceremonies, and culture. What began, as we saw earlier, as an artist's retreat under the banner of the Bohemian Club, a place meant to escape commerce and politics, took on a very different character. Once those traditions were transplanted into the redwoods of Bohemian Grove, away from the city, away from public view, the club's emphasis on performance and symbolism did not disappear. It intensified. From the earliest years of the Grove, members staged elaborate ceremonies. These were not spontaneous campfire gatherings. They were scripted, rehearsed, and repeated annually, becoming part of the Grove's internal culture. Club archives, member memoirs, and reporting by outlets such as the San Francisco Chronicle describe a setting where theater, myth, and ritual blended deliberately. The most famous of these ceremonies is known as the cremation of care. Its existence is not a rumor. It has been described in club literature, referenced by historians, and documented by journalists who obtained audio and eyewitness accounts. The ceremony traditionally takes place on the first night of the annual encampment, marking the symbolic beginning of the two-week retreat. According to descriptions published in books such as Bohemian Grove and other retreats by political scientist William Domhoff, the cremation of care is a theatrical performance staged beside a lake within the grove. At its center stands a large stone, approximately 40 feet tall, constructed in the late 1920s and still present today. The owl, according to club explanations, represents wisdom. Similar symbolism appears in classical Greek and Roman iconography, where owls were associated with Athena, the goddess of wisdom. The ceremony involves robed participants, scripted dialogue, music composed specifically for the event, and dramatic lighting. A symbolic effigy known as care is ceremonially destroyed, burned, or lowered into fire, while speeches and chants emphasize the casting off of worldly worries. Club publications have long stated that the meaning is straightforward. Members are encouraged to abandon anxiety, responsibility, and public pressure during their time at the Grove. Care, in this context, refers not to empathy but to burden. Historians who have studied elite fraternal organizations note that such rituals were common in late 19th and early 20th century male societies. Groups like the Freemasons, Oddfellows, and university secret societies used elaborate ceremonies not for secrecy alone, but for bonding, hierarchy, and shared identity. Bohemian Grove fits squarely within that tradition. Importantly, no credible historian has produced evidence that the cremation of care is linked to decision-making, policy-making, or occult belief systems. What has been documented is the psychological function of ritual, reinforcing belonging, signaling status, and marking a transition from public life to private retreat. The Grove itself amplifies this effect. The redwoods are not incidental. Environmental historians have pointed out that forests, especially ancient ones, have long been used in human societies as symbolic spaces for reflection and renewal. In the Grove, towering trees block out modern infrastructure. Camps are spread far apart. Paths are winding. Visibility is limited. There are no microphones, no cameras, and by strict rule, no press. Members are discouraged from discussing business or politics formally. This rule, known internally as the prohibition on shop talk, is documented in club guidelines and repeatedly mentioned in journalistic investigations. Whether the rule is always followed is impossible to verify, but its existence is not disputed. Music and performance remain central. Operas, symphonies, and plays are written and performed by members, many of whom are accomplished amateurs or patrons of the arts. Some performances are intentionally satirical, mocking power and authority. Others draw on classical mythology or American folklore. Sociologists studying elite leisure culture have described this as a form of role reversal. Men who hold immense authority in daily life temporarily adopt costumes, characters, and exaggerated personas. The performance becomes a release valve, one that strengthens group cohesion. Critically, this culture is exclusive by design. For most of its history, membership was limited to men. Women were excluded except as performers or staff, a policy that mirrored broader gender norms of elite institutions well into the 20th century. While the Bohemian Club has faced criticism over this exclusion, documented in court challenges and press coverage, the Grove itself has largely preserved its traditional structure. Secrecy is enforced not just socially but logistically. Security checkpoints, private roads, and controlled access have been described in detail by journalists who observed the perimeter during encampments. Attendees' schedules are not published. Guests are vetted. Violations of privacy are treated seriously. This environment, ritualized, insulated, and repetitive, creates continuity. The same ceremonies are performed year after year. The same camps gather in the same locations. Traditions are passed down, not questioned publicly, and this is where perception begins to shift. To outsiders, the combination of powerful men, ancient symbolism, and enforced silence feels unsettling. To insiders, according to multiple first-hand accounts, it feels normal, almost mundane, a private tradition inherited rather than invented. What matters historically is not whether these rituals are mysterious. It is that they are real, documented, and deliberately hidden from public view. And once figures of national importance began participating in these ceremonies, public curiosity turned into scrutiny. Because rituals may symbolize escape, but power never truly stays behind. Notable members and reported influence. As Bohemian Grove, Secrets of the Redwoods moves forward, the focus shifts from ritual and tradition to the people who have passed beneath those trees. Men whose names are not symbolic but historical. Because whatever Bohemian Grove represents culturally, its significance ultimately comes from who has been there. This is not a matter of rumor. Attendance by major political and economic figures has been documented through presidential memoirs, biographies, archival photographs, guest lists reported by journalists, and confirmations from the Bohemian Club itself. Among the most frequently cited attendees are U.S. presidents. Herbert Hoover was a longtime member, referenced repeatedly in biographies and historical studies of early 20th century American politics. Dwight D. Eisenhower attended prior to and during his presidency, a fact confirmed in multiple accounts, including reporting by the New York Times. Richard Nixon attended before becoming president and later referred to the Grove in recorded conversations, most notably in the Nixon White House tapes, where he spoke dismissively of the atmosphere, calling it a place where powerful men gathered away from women and public life. Ronald Reagan attended Bohemian Grove on several occasions, both before and after his presidency. This is documented in Reagan biographies and in reporting by the San Francisco Chronicle, which tracked presidential attendance at the Grove during the late 20th century. George H.W. Bush, while serving as vice president, was also reported to have attended, according to investigative reporting and later confirmations by political journalists. Attendance by George W. Bush has been discussed in press coverage, though fewer first-hand accounts exist. What is crucial here is not secrecy for its own sake, but continuity. Across decades, across political parties, across ideological divides, the Grove remained a shared space for America's ruling class. Beyond presidents, the Grove has hosted corporate leaders whose influence shaped global markets. CEOs and board members from companies such as General Electric, Bechtel, and major financial institutions are documented members, identified through corporate biographies, club records cited in investigative books, and reporting by academic researchers like G. William Domhoff, who analyzed elite networks in the United States. Domhoff's work, published through the University of California system, did not claim that decisions were formally made at Bohemian Grove. Instead, his research emphasized social network formation, the informal relationships that develop when powerful individuals interact repeatedly in private settings. This distinction matters. Political scientists widely agree that influence does not require formal votes. Trust, familiarity, and access often shape outcomes long before any public decision is announced. Bohemian Grove, by its very design, creates an environment where such relationships can deepen without documentation. Journalists who investigated the Grove have consistently reported the same pattern. No official agendas, no recorded meetings, no written resolutions. Yet conversations happen, friendships form, alliances solidify. In 1980, a now famous example entered the historical record. According to multiple biographies and press accounts, Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush were both present at Bohemian Grove during the summer before the Republican National Convention. While no evidence shows a formal political deal made at the Grove, historians have noted that the relationship between the two men, who would later run together as president and vice president, was strengthened during this period. The point is not that Bohemian Grove determines outcomes. The point is that it connects people who determine outcomes elsewhere. Judges, military officials, diplomats, media executives, and university presidents have also been documented as attendees. Their presence has been confirmed through memoirs, leaked membership rosters published by journalists, and public acknowledgments and interviews. Media involvement is particularly notable. Executives from major newspapers, television networks, and publishing houses have been members of the Bohemian Club. This has raised long-standing ethical questions among journalism scholars about access, independence, and conflicts of interest. Questions discussed openly in academic journals and press criticism, not conspiracy forums. To be clear, no credible investigation has proven that Bohemian Grove operates as a shadow government. But credible research has shown that elite cohesion matters. Sociologists describe places like the Grove as social infrastructure of power, environments that do not command authority directly, but sustain the relationships through which authority flows. These conclusions appear in peer-reviewed studies of elite institutions, not speculative literature. What unsettles critics is not any single decision traced to the Grove, but the cumulative effect of exclusion. The public does not attend. The press does not observe. Records are not released. In an era where transparency is expected, this kind of insulation stands out. And it is precisely that insulation, combined with the documented presence of presidents and corporate leaders, that transform Bohemian Grove from an obscure retreat into a subject of national curiosity. Once journalists began asking questions, The Grove responded not with explanations, but with silence. And silence, historically, invites investigation. Public exposure and investigations. Up to this point in Bohemian Grove, secrets of the redwoods. Everything we have discussed, its origins, rituals, and members, existed largely within elite circles, reported sporadically and without sustained scrutiny. That changed in the mid-20th century, when Bohemian Grove crossed an invisible line. It stopped being merely exclusive and became publicly controversial. The first cracks appeared through traditional journalism. As early as the 1940s and 1950s, newspapers such as the San Francisco Chronicle and the New York Times began mentioning Bohemian Grove more frequently, not just as a society curiosity, but as a gathering place for men who actively governed the country. These early reports were cautious, often deferential, reflecting the norms of the time. Still, they confirmed something important. The Grove was real, active, and populated by people at the highest levels of power. By the 1970s, American journalism had changed. Post-Watergate, secrecy itself became suspect. Investigative reporters began re-examining institutions that had long escaped attention, and Bohemian Grove was suddenly no longer untouchable. One of the most significant figures in this shift was political scientist G. William Domhoff, whose academic research into elite power structures brought Bohemian Grove into scholarly focus. In his book, The Bohemian Grove and Other Retreats, Domhoff relied not on rumors, but on interviews, documents, and first-hand observation from invited guests. His conclusion was careful and restrained. The Grove was not a command center for secret decisions, but a powerful social environment where relationships among elites were reinforced. At nearly the same time, journalists attempted something unprecedented: direct observation. In 1989, British journalist John Ronson later wrote about Bohemian Grove in Them, Adventures with Extremists. But the most consequential exposure occurred in 2000, when radio host and investigative commentator Alex Jones, accompanied by journalist John Ronson, secretly entered the Grove during the annual encampment. What they recorded, the audio of the cremation of care ceremony, was later broadcast and analyzed widely. While the recording did not reveal political plotting or criminal activity, it provided the public with its first unfiltered glimpse of a ritual that had previously been described only secondhand. Mainstream media outlets responded cautiously. Coverage by CNN, The Guardian, and The Washington Post focused less on the ceremony itself and more on what it represented: confirmation that powerful institutions could operate entirely outside public visibility. Importantly, none of these outlets validated claims of occult governance or secret policymaking. Instead, they emphasized verified facts: the location, the membership, the ritual's theatrical nature, and the club's refusal to comment. Public reaction intensified. Protests began appearing near the Grove's perimeter during annual encampments. Activist groups, transparency advocates, and anti-globalization movements cited Bohemian Grove as a symbol of elite unaccountability. These demonstrations were documented repeatedly by local California news outlets and, at times, national press. The Bohemian Club's response remained consistent: no interviews, no official explanations, beyond brief statements asserting that the Grove was a private retreat with no political function. Legal challenges followed. Journalists and activists filed public records requests and lawsuits attempting to obtain membership lists or details about activities. Courts repeatedly ruled that, as a private organization on private land, the Bohemian Club was not legally required to disclose internal records. These rulings, reported in California legal journals and newspapers, reinforced the Grove's protected status. What emerged during this period was a paradox. The more journalists confirmed that Bohemian Grove was not a shadow government, the more the public fixated on the fact that it was unknowable by design. Investigations established boundaries. No evidence of formal policymaking. No proof of criminal conspiracy. No documented directives issued from the Grove. But they also confirmed something equally important. Elite figures met there regularly. Access was restricted. Transparency was intentionally absent. By the early 2000s, Bohemian Grove had become embedded in popular consciousness, not as proven villainy, but as a symbol of power operating comfortably behind closed doors. And once a symbol enters public imagination, it takes on a life beyond facts. This is where the line between documented reality and speculation began to blur. Conspiracy theories versus reality. By the time Bohemian Grove, Secrets of the Redwoods reached public awareness, something inevitable happened. Silence created a vacuum, and vacuums do not stay empty for long. Where records end, theories begin. Bohemian Grove's refusal to explain itself did not just invite curiosity, it fueled suspicion. Over decades, a collection of narratives emerged, spreading through books, radio shows, documentaries, and eventually the internet. Some were grounded in misinterpretation, others in fear, a few in deliberate exaggeration. To understand Bohemian Grove honestly, each claim must be examined against what is documented, not what is repeated. One of the most persistent theories is that major political decisions are secretly made at the Grove, that wars, elections, and economic policies are decided beneath the redwoods. This idea appears frequently in alternative media, but it collapses under scrutiny. Multiple investigations, academic and journalistic, have searched for evidence of formal decision-making at Bohemian Grove. None has produced documents, recordings, or testimony showing votes, policy drafts, or official agreements. Historians and political scientists, including G. William Domhoff, have repeatedly emphasized the absence of proof. What has been documented is informal conversation, and that distinction matters. In political science, informal networking is powerful, but it is not the same as covert governance. Influence operates subtly through trust, access, and familiarity. Bohemian Grove fits this model. It does not replace institutions. It reinforces relationships that already exist within them. Another theory claims the Grove functions as a global elite command center, linking American leaders to international power structures. Here too, facts draw boundaries. While some international figures and diplomats have attended as guests, Bohemian Grove is overwhelmingly American in composition. Membership lists analyzed by journalists show a concentration of US-based executives, politicians, military leaders, and media figures. There is no evidence of a standing global council or coordinated international agenda operating from the Grove. The most controversial claims involve occultism and secret worship. Images of robed figures chanting firelight and the massive stone owl have circulated widely, often stripped of context. These visuals are real. The interpretations attached to them are not. Historians of religion and ritual have pointed out that theatrical symbolism does not equal belief. The cremation of care borrows imagery from classical mythology, fraternal orders, and early 20th century pageantry. Similar aesthetics appear in university ceremonies, military traditions, and civic rituals across Western history. No credible evidence shows that Bohemian Grove rituals involve religious worship, sacrifice, or supernatural belief. Investigations by mainstream journalists, including those who obtained audio recordings, found no content suggesting occult practice beyond symbolic performance. And yet the imagery remains powerful, because secrecy magnifies symbolism. Another theory argues that journalists attending the Grove protect powerful interests, explaining why coverage remains limited. This claim has been taken seriously enough to be discussed in journalism, ethics literature. It is true that media executives have been members. It is also true that journalists have written critically about the Grove despite this. Investigative reports, books, and academic studies exist precisely because some journalists chose scrutiny over access. What has not been proven is coordinated suppression. There is no documented directive, memo, or agreement instructing media outlets to avoid the topic. Instead, media scholars describe a more subtle effect. Social proximity can soften criticism, even without conscious intent. This phenomenon is widely studied and not unique to Bohemian Grove. Then there is the theory that the Grove is deliberately designed to remain unknowable, precisely to inspire fear. On this point, critics and defenders almost agree. The Bohemian Club has never denied that privacy is central to the Grove's identity. Its rules explicitly discourage disclosure. Its security measures are extensive. Its silence is intentional, but intention does not equal conspiracy. Private institutions across history, from royal courts to modern boardrooms, have used secrecy to preserve autonomy, not to orchestrate hidden rule. The danger lies not in assuming the worst, but in refusing to separate evidence from imagination. Every credible investigation into Bohemian Grove arrives at the same conclusion. There is no proof of secret governance. There is no proof of criminal conspiracy. There is no proof of occult control. But there is proof of something else. Extreme concentration of power, extreme insulation from public view, and a culture that does not feel compelled to explain itself. That combination is unsettling, not because of what it hides, but because of what it represents. In democratic societies, power is expected to justify itself. Bohemian Grove does not, and that unresolved tension between legality and legitimacy, privacy and accountability is why the Grove refuses to fade from public consciousness. As the world entered the digital age, that tension only intensified. Bohemian Grove in the 21st century. As Bohemian Grove, Secrets of the Redwoods enters the modern era, the question is no longer whether the Grove exists or who once attended. The question is how a tradition, built on silence, survives in a world that records everything. The early 21st century transformed power itself. Smartphones replaced notebooks. Leaks replaced press briefings. Social media collapsed the distance between private action and public scrutiny. And yet Bohemian Grove endured. After the year 2000, following secret recordings, growing protests, and sustained media attention, many observers expected the Grove to change dramatically. Some predicted it would shrink. Others believed it would dissolve entirely. It did neither. Instead, it adapted quietly. Security around the Grove increased. Journalists and researchers documented tighter perimeter control, expanded coordination with local law enforcement, and stricter internal enforcement of privacy rules. Drone restrictions were added as aerial surveillance became common. Access roads were monitored more heavily during encampments. The Bohemian Club did not issue public explanations. It simply closed ranks. Membership in the 21st century continued to reflect the upper tiers of American power, though with subtle shifts. Traditional heavy industries gave way to finance, technology, and global services. CEOs from Silicon Valley firms, investment banks, defense contractors, and multinational corporations appeared in reported membership lists compiled by journalists and researchers. At the same time, overt political presence became more restrained, while former presidents and senior officials continued to be linked to the Grove through biographies and press accounts. Sitting office holders appeared more cautious about public association. Media scrutiny made visibility a liability. The Grove did not become less influential. It became quieter. Public perception, however, shifted sharply. In the post-financial crisis era, distrust of elites grew worldwide. Movements focused on inequality, corporate power, and institutional opacity reframed Bohemian Grove not as a curiosity, but as a symbol. Protest coverage increasingly linked the Grove to broader critiques of elite insulation rather than specific allegations. Academic analysis followed. Sociologists and political scientists, writing in the 2010s, described Bohemian Grove as an example of what they called elite social closure spaces, where influence is reproduced culturally rather than exercised directly. In this view, the Grove is not where decisions are made, but where decision-makers reaffirm shared assumptions. That distinction became central. As transparency expectations rose, the Grove's refusal to engage publicly stood out. Unlike corporations that issue statements or governments that hold hearings, the Bohemian Club remained silent, relying on legal privacy rather than public trust. Media coverage reflected this shift. By the 2020s, major outlets no longer framed the Grove as a potential secret government. Instead, reporting focused on its endurance, how an institution rooted in 19th century elite culture survived the collapse of deference in the digital age. Legal challenges continued sporadically, particularly around discrimination and access. Courts consistently upheld the club's right to operate as a private association. These rulings, while legally straightforward, reinforced a deeper tension. What is lawful is not always perceived as legitimate. Inside the Grove, traditions reportedly remained largely unchanged. The rituals continued. The camps gathered as they always had. Music, performance, and ceremony remained central. What changed was the world outside. Every leaked email scandal, every whistleblower revelation, every exposure of closed-door influence added weight to the Grove's symbolism. Even without new revelations, its existence alone became provocative. By the mid-2020s, Bohemian Grove occupied a paradoxical position. It was less mysterious than ever, its history mapped, its rituals described, its membership patterns analyzed, and yet it felt more distant. Because in an age where transparency is demanded, Bohemian Grove offers none, not because it must hide wrongdoing, but because it does not believe it needs to explain itself. That belief, more than any ceremony or gathering, defines Bohemian Grove in the 21st century. and it raises a deeper question, one that goes beyond this forest. What does secrecy mean in a society that no longer trusts it? The redwoods are still there. Long after the headlines fade, long after the protests disperse, long after each generation of leaders steps aside, the forest remains unchanged. The same paths, the same clearings, the same silence that returns once the gates close. Bohemian Grove does not end with a revelation. It never has. After more than a century of scrutiny, investigation, recording, and debate, there is no final document to uncover, no hidden order exposed, no decisive moment that explains everything. What exists instead is something more persistent and more uncomfortable, a place that does not explain itself. That refusal is what keeps Bohemian Grove alive in the public imagination, not because it proves wrongdoing, but because it resists resolution in a world trained to expect disclosure. Secrecy itself feels like an answer, even when it is not. Places like this endure because power is not only exercised in public, it is shaped in private. Relationships form away from microphones. Trust is built without minutes or transcripts. And while none of that requires conspiracy, it does require exclusion. That exclusion frustrates democratic instincts, and it fuels curiosity. Bohemian Grove sits at the intersection of those tensions between privacy and accountability, tradition and transparency, influence and visibility. It neither confirms the darkest fears nor fully dismisses them. It simply remains. And perhaps that is the most honest ending possible. Not a revelation, but a reminder that some doors stay closed not because they hide answers, but because those inside believe they don't owe explanations. And as long as power continues to value discretion, places like this will continue to exist, quietly, legally, and just beyond reach. The forest will keep its silence. The questions will keep returning. And somewhere beneath the redwoods, the story will continue, unfinished, unresolved, and waiting to be told again.